Welcome to Senior Moments. I'm Tommy Ellison. You know, I forget names, car keys, and what I came in the room for, but somehow I remember the 60s with crystal clear clarity. What you are about to hear is evidence of a misspent youth, and believe me, I've got some stories. Let's go. Well, hi, boys and girls. It's Tommy Ellison, and this is Senior Moments, and we are live at 5, and this is kind of a special day for me. It's an episode that I've been wanting to do for a while, and I felt like I should have done it earlier, but, you know, it's okay because this is actually the window of time that I want to talk about. This is this window from July, I don't know, 26th, 27th. I don't remember the exact date. We'll see that in just a second probably. And August the 4th, 30 years ago, were the celebrations of the Summer Olympic Games at Atlanta, Georgia, otherwise known as the Atlanta Summer Olympics. And like I said, wow, 30 years ago, these games were being held during this 2-3 week window that we are experiencing right now. And I was there. And I was there for practically every day of it there in Atlanta. And this is a story I wanted to share with you this evening. I had a job then. Yeah, I had a job. I actually worked for a company called Robbins Sports Surfaces, manufacturers of sport and recreational flooring systems. When you see maple basketball floors, you many times are actually looking at one that Robbins manufactured and was installed by a network of authorized dealers who I work for now, Covington. We're an authorized dealer for Robbins, but during this window 30 years ago, I was actually an employee of Robbins living here in Birmingham, but kind of covering the Southeast as my regional territory for sales. And so because of my proximity, I think, I was the liaison for Robbins on the ground, so to speak, during the whole time of the Olympics because of our involvement there with the Olympic Games and the floors that many of the games were played on. Now, was I chosen because of my skill sets on installing floors or repairing floors? Absolutely not. I don't think that was the case. Not really. But I was the closest employee of Robbins. And, you know, being 120 miles away from Atlanta, I was certainly a lot closer than Cincinnati employees, which was where our home office was located. But, you know, that transition, I wasn't in the seats watching. I was actually on the floors many of the time that the games were being played. And it was a lot of the maple floors that you saw there during those games, as well as some special subfloor assemblies that we designed and installed that were being played in other sports activities beyond basketball. But I'll get into a little detail on that in just a moment. But what I did want to show you was the plaque that I found the other day online from the 1996 Summer Olympic Games, the games of the, XX26 Olympiad, I guess that is. And it says it was from July 19th through August 5th, 1996. And they hosted the Centennial Summer Olympic Games, the largest event in Atlanta history. And the International Olympic Committee had awarded the Olympic Games to Atlanta back in 1990. They kind of work ahead there. And so they were preparing, and so lots of the stuff that was being done to prepare for those games was involving vendors, and vendors like us who were actually in the business of furnishing sports floors for various sports. And so it was during this Olympic window that I come to be the liaison for the company that I worked for. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about the venues, because the first venue that I was actually involved with was the gymnasium that was built at Morehouse College there in Atlanta for the Olympics. And to my knowledge, this was probably one of the first permanent installations that was actually built for an Olympic event. I mean, other cities that had these Olympic events typically were using existing sports arenas, or they perhaps had temporary space set up for the play. And an example of this in Atlanta was probably the Georgia World Congress Center, where they played a number of different sporting events. But it was already there, my point. But Morehouse was actually built for the university and was built for the what they called the preliminary basketball games there in Atlanta. And so there were actually two venues where basketball was being played. One was at Morehouse, and that was during the day. And then after those games were over, that venue would close, and perhaps some of the, I guess you would say, more popular games that were about to be played in basketball were played at the Georgia Dome. And the Georgia Dome, we had the portable floor that was actually built by Robbins in Robbins manufacturing facility for portable basketball floors. You see them all the time in various Division I schools, as well as NBA arenas and women's NBA arenas still. And so these portable floors that were built during that time by Robbins were actually built up and around Cincinnati area, sanded, finished, all the markings were put on, the lines were put on, and then they were taken apart and shipped to the Georgia Dome for the big-time basketball games, I'll call them, that were going to be played there at the Dome. So the Dome, as I say, was hosting the major games, and of course the final gold medal games for both the men's and the women's were also played at the Georgia Dome. So one of the I just thought one of the features, kind of behind the scenes feature that you might not have ever thought about or maybe even be aware of, was the construction of that floor for the Georgia Dome. In fact, let me run past this one right here. This was a drawing that the Atlanta Committee on the Games furnished to Robbins with all of the court markings and the graphics and the branding that was to be put on that floor. These are painted on permanently. This is what the floor, they wanted it to look like. And of course, there was the standard Olympic color schemes that were used. If you had any participation in those games, you'll remember this kind of teal colored effect that they had on a lot of their stuff, even the uniforms and the stuff that the volunteers were wearing, the uniforms they were wearing and what have you. But this was what the floor was supposed to look like, and they prepared what was called a shop drawing. And the shop drawing would actually call out not only the location as well as the colors of the floor, but it would also call out the different brands, like the Atlanta 1996 logo. You'll notice there was kind of a flowered look on the floor in addition to the torch there at the center circle. But you'll also notice on that center circle there's some little indicators there saying PMS 1245, PMS, all these different PMS numbers. And what those are color codes. Let's see if I can find a better shot of that here. The color codes were designed, as you can see, there were 10 different colors that were placed on that floor. And so when all was said and done, the floor would actually look like this in play there at the Dome. This was the PMS layout. You can see on the edge of that drawing that I showed you a moment ago, the design, but this is what the design would look like in all of the 10 PMS colors. So there was a lot of work being done on this floor prior to its actual shipping. And of course, they had to approve all those things. And if it wasn't right, well, you had to do it again. But fortunately for us and our technicians, we nailed it the first time. A lot of good things happened back then in the work that we were doing. A lot of good relationships were made. This was a gentleman who worked for the NBA, and he was actually the liaison for the National Basketball Association and the Olympic Games, and got to meet him there at the games. And this was the guy that was the brains behind all of the work that we did. This was a gentleman by the name of Mike Neese, an employee of Robbins, very brilliant technician, very brilliant thinker. And Mike was the one that actually designed the removable floors. I'll call them that because the basketball floor was portable in the sense that it could be taken up and moved. But the main floors that were used for things like volleyball, badminton, gymnastics, there was a number of other different activities, obviously, that were going on during the event, but they had a vinyl surface on top, a surface that the Olympic Committee had chosen. But unfortunately, that vinyl was not very forgiving as far as force reduction, shock absorption was concerned. And so Robbins was commissioned to build these removable, in the sense that they would be taken up and taken away after the games, but they would be there underneath those vinyl surfaces to provide the necessary comfort and shock absorption that the athletes were accustomed to seeing in other venues where they participated. There was a lot of other things that went on during this thing. And the dome, like I said, the photograph of the dome and the picture of the portable floor down was a pretty striking picture of what we did back then. You'll also notice that there's seating on both sides of that, and that's because the dome during the Olympics was actually split in two pieces with seating between the two playing surfaces. There on the left was the basketball floor, and on the right was a setup for gymnastics. This was the gymnastics finals that were being held in that arrangement. But prior to that, that area was free and clear of all the gymnastics equipment, and the team handball surface was applied over the removable flooring systems. And so the team handball game was actually played there on the other half of the Olympics. So with all that said, it was a kind of a unique opportunity for me. I have to tell you, there's a few things that stand out in my mind. Of course, one, there was, the transition that was taking place between Morehouse and the Dome. I would go and be there on the floor at Morehouse during those games, and then at the end of that session, I would load up all of the stuff that we had to clean the floor with. That was the other thing. I was kind of like a custodian for the Robbins floor, and had a couple of guys that were helping me. We would clean the floor and make sure it was ready for the next day, and then we would grab lunch, head down, or actually supper. We'd head down to the dome and going into the Georgia Dome there and get ready for the evening sessions. And then following the evening sessions, we'd clean up that floor and get it ready for play on the next day. There's a lot of things that happened during this Olympic window, some of which had nothing to do with the Olympics. I know in looking back, if you may not recall this, depending on how old you are, but in 1967, a gentleman by the name of Cassius Clay, who had won gold medals in boxing in, I think it was, I'm not sure what Olympics that was. I may have a note on that later here. But he had chosen during the Vietnam War to skip the draft and not go. And because of that, his boxing license was stripped from him. He was the heavyweight champion of the world at the time under the name of Cassius Clay, and he chose not to go or be inducted into the Army. And it was citing religious beliefs, because right about that same time was when he converted to the Muslim religion and became known as Muhammad Ali. And so his heavyweight title was stripped, and then shortly thereafter, his Olympic medals were, well, they weren't taken away, but he was very angry at the whole situation. You know, his appeal in the Supreme Court was eventually overturned, and his conviction was thrown out, but it took 4 years for that to happen. But separately from that event of the boxing licensing issue, he was angry. He took his gold medals from the Olympics, and it was in Rome, by the way, in 1960 when he won it. But he took the gold medals, and according to folklore or his testimony, I guess, he threw them in the Ohio River, I guess somewhere near Louisville, which was his hometown. So he did not have the medals. And so 36 years after those medals disappeared, they came back on the floor that we built, because during the halftime ceremonies of the gold medal games, the men's gold medal games, the medals were restored to Ali by President Samaranch. Can we edit that out? No, okay. Samaranch at halftime of that men's game. The U.S. was playing Yugoslavia, and his medals were restored back to him. Just kind of an interesting aside, I was sitting about 2 rows off of the main floor that night, and I was telling a gentleman who was a volunteer. He actually worked for a recreation department in Canada, but he was a volunteer there in Atlanta. And I was telling him I was going to move on the other side of the arena to get a seat with some other guys that I know. And he looked at me. He said, "You don't really want to move. You want to stay right where you are." And I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "I can't tell you, but you'll appreciate the fact that you'll stay here, and it'll pay off. Believe me." And so I had no idea what he was talking about. So I stayed in my seat there and watched the first half of the game. And right about the time the game was about to end, I had to go answer Mother Nature's call. So I walked down onto the floor, walked out of the egress there that led to the off-floor area where the men's rooms were located. But there, just on the other side of the curtain that was separating the main room from the hallways outside, sat Muhammad Ali in a golf cart with another gentleman driving him, and they were about to take the floor and go out to the center court where his medals were restored. And I actually had the opportunity. There was nobody standing around other than his driver there on the golf cart and himself. And I walked over and shook his hand. And I had no idea why he was there at the time. I think, if I'm not mistaken, in my mind, I was shaking the hand of the guy that actually lit the torch when the ceremonies all started. He was the guy that took the torch to the top of the stairway there to light the Olympic flame. And so that, in my mind, was what was, I guess, causing me to maybe go get a handshake and a fist bump and whatever. And I did. And then when I came back, of course, they had moved him onto the floor and they were restoring his medals to him. And it was kind of a neat evening. Beyond the dome itself, as I said earlier, these removable subfloors, they had a kind of a resilient nature to them, and they were used for volleyball, gymnastics, table tennis, and other high-impact sports, including badminton, but had this different vinyl surface on top. And the reason I tell you this is because of the fact that we were doing flooring in so many different venues. My credentials had like 5 different venues on it, where most of the people that were working there at the Olympics as volunteers were credentialed for one sport, one venue. And I remember people looking at my name tag or my badge and saying, "Who are you, and why is it that you've got so many venues you can go in?" Which also meant that I didn't need a ticket. So I got to see a lot of badminton and table tennis and volleyball. It was being played at the old Phillips Arena. Used to be, I guess, called the Omni back then. And in case you're wondering, by the way, the portable that was in the dome was after the Olympics purchased by Westminster School there in Atlanta. And it was placed, we had to cut it down to size, but it was placed in their new elementary school gymnasium. And you probably ask the question, well, why would a floor like that, with that kind of recognition, both the men and the women's USA teams won gold that year. So there was a lot going on that floor. But the reason they wanted that floor was because their principal had written, prior to the Olympics, the social studies and history curriculum for all of the Georgia schools to use as a workup to the actual games themselves. And so they got the floor, put it in, proud of it. To my knowledge, it may still be there today. I don't know. Haven't been back in 30 years. But that's kind of the story behind what we built. But there was another night from that summer that I've never forgotten. And that was the night of the bombing. I was living in a condo that we had rented from a principal of another private school there in Atlanta, and she had decided that rather to manage all of the traffic and the crowds and the tourists, she went to Colorado during this time frame. And so she had her condo there that overlooked Centennial Park for rent. And so we rented it from her for the 3 weeks that we were involved with the games. And so we kind of used it during the day as a kind of a stopping off point, because we had a number of our customers coming to the Olympics and furnishing tickets for them. And so it was kind of a rest haven. And I was, living there during the day, and it was on about the 4th floor, and it was an old warehouse that had been converted to these living quarters, a condominium. I don't know what you would call that, warehouse condos, I guess. But her windows that faced Centennial Park started about 4 foot off of the floor of her condo and went all the way up to about a 20-foot ceiling. So there was this huge bank of glass there that you could look out over onto and into the park, and of course have a really nice view of the skyline of the city of Atlanta. It wasn't real fancy, but it was a place to call home for that 3-week period. And so that's where I was living. And this particular night, we had some guest customers come in that had been to some of the events there in the Olympics, and we were sitting around, and we had a little black and white television that she owned. We had it on. We was trying to get a good picture. She had a set of rabbit ears, and so we were trying to pick up a local channel, and suddenly. And it was early in the morning. It was like 12:30, 1 o'clock. But there was a number of things still going on in the park, including a lot of concert stages that were in full force. And that's when we heard the boom. And it literally shook the windows of that condo. Didn't bust them, just shook them. And we were thinking to ourselves, hey, I bet you they're fixing to start the fireworks show. Not that they'd ever had one. But we were sitting there in the condo thinking it was a fireworks show about to start. And so we ran out to the fire escape and walked up the stairs to the roof with the idea of watching this big, massive, Olympic scheduled fireworks show going on. And so consequently, when we got up there was no further sounds. It was quiet, and I mean deathly quiet, and no pun intended. And we started to notice the blue lights of the Atlanta police approaching the park from all over the city, just kind of converging on the park, and we thought, uh-oh. And so we went back downstairs, and of course they had come on the television with a news interruption stating that a bomb had gone off there at Centennial Park. And the people that of course, there was a lot of hoopla for 2 or 3 weeks. It was crazy because I won't say that the security was lax, but no one was expecting that to happen. But then immediately they started clamping down on all the entrances, and everything became a bottleneck. And it was really, from a tourist standpoint, from an employee volunteer standpoint, it was a bit of a nightmare from then on. And that was pretty early in the Olympic event that happened, because everything was bottlenecked down to go through metal detectors and the wanding process to make sure nothing was coming into the park. And of course the same thing was happening at all the venues as well. So it became a real challenge to get in and out of the venues, which is essentially what we needed to do our job. And I do remember this. I was wearing a pager back then. You remember pagers? Some people call them beepers. And my wife and I had a deal that if she ever needed to talk to me real badly, that she would page me 911. No mystery there. And it's funny because when there were several people that knew that same code, that I, family, friends, that sort of thing. And my pager was going nuts. I could not hardly turn it off before another page would be coming through, because of the people that knew I was there. They knew I was somewhere in the proximity of the park. And of course they were checking on me to make sure I was okay. And I was. But it was quite a night. And 30 years kind of gives you some distance from a night like that. And in closing, 30 years later, I'm looking back, and what kind of stands out the most now about those days, well, there's several things. Got a couple of folks watching here tonight. Let's see what we got going on. Donna Hardy Troncalli has chimed in saying, "Friend, I hope you will write a book." Donna, that is a great idea, and I bet you I could probably sell 2 or 3. It seems kind of popular right now, if you're a Fairfield football player, to write a book. I think we have a few others that it's in the process of writing them now, and I'm not even going to go there because Steve Stewart's watching, and I know what he's thinking. And anyway, you got me off track here, guys. Anyway, memories about that time, I guess. Living in a warehouse condo was not a lot of fun. Being away from my family probably was another bit of a toll that it took for 3 weeks. I think I remember going home one weekend, like on a Saturday night, and came back on Sunday night. One of the cool things about the Olympics, and it still goes on, is swapping the little souvenir pins with all the various organizations and vendors that are working there and volunteering during the event. And I've got a pile of those things. I probably should figure out how to mount them on a board somewhere, but I don't know if anybody would care about it but me. Another memory, comparing the security before and after the bomb. It was unbelievable. Here's an idea for you. This was amazing to me. There was not a single Pepsi machine in the city of Atlanta and possibly the state of Georgia. Coke won that war. They were a major sponsor. Of course, their headquarters is in Atlanta. But I guess they did have a bit of a home field advantage for that reason. But you could not find at a gas station, a 7-Eleven, any place where there was a Pepsi machine, a vending machine, to get a Pepsi. It was Coke blanketed the city of Atlanta, and I think probably Georgia as well during that time frame. I've often wondered what I would have done had any of the floors that I was supposedly charged to be the liaison for, if they had actually been damaged. Because I'm not a technician, I'm not a carpenter. And, my toolkit during that time frame was a hammer and a roll of duct tape and a prayer that Shaquille O'Neal would not crush that floor running up and down the court. And fortunately for me, I never really had to do anything. We did a good job. They held up and there were no problems. But when O'Neal ran up and down the floor, you could literally feel that portable floor vibrating if you stood on the end of the court there at the baseline. It was quite a thing. It was like, I guess, I always wondered what it would be like to be in an earthquake, and that's probably the closest thing I've been so far. I remember being kind of amazed at all of the Balkan region teams that were there, like Yugoslavia and Croatia and Lithuania, and there were several others that were there playing international basketball. And the really weird thing about it was they all looked like my Uncle Steve. Now, my Uncle Steve was the son of Steve Estock, Sr. in Fairfield, who came from that Austrian-Hungary border area. It kind of shifted politically through the years, but he came over as an infant, and I've told that story in a previous episode. But that facial structure, high cheekbones, big noses, that was kind of typical of that region of Eastern Europe, I guess you would call it. And all those guys that were playing on those teams, again, they looked like Uncle Steve and Uncle Eddie and Uncle Tommy. It was really kind of surreal watching those guys play basketball. I also recall remembering that I made a comment right after the games that I really never, ever need to watch international basketball played again anytime soon. I mean, there were different rules, different court layouts, and in the case of the Olympics, there was, way too much of a strange thing going on playing at that venue. Both of those venues under a little bit different set of rules and regulations for international play. I remember, watching Robbins prior to the Olympics and the politics that was going on between the International Olympic Committee and the Atlanta Committee for the Olympic Games. And there was a lot of back and forth, a lot of politics that were occurring in I guess an area that you don't really think about is sport, and with events of this magnitude, of course, there's always going to be politics that are involved. I kind of regret, and maybe the only regret I had was not going to the final closing ceremonies. And in reality, I was actually given 2 tickets by that NBA liaison guy that I was showing you his picture earlier. And he gave them to me, and I was pretty much there by myself, but I had some other people from Robbins, and my boss, Jay, and his wife, Stephanie, were down from Cincinnati, and so I gave them my 2 tickets, and they went, and they had a ball. I mean, that was a night. There was 40,000, 50,000 fans at the closing ceremony down at the stadium where the track was located, and was later converted to the new Braves Stadium. But all of them jumped the barricades, ran onto the fields. The music was playing. They joined the athletes, and they started dancing there on the field. It started raining. They were all just getting drenched, but it didn't matter. They were there at the closing ceremonies of the Olympics. I don't miss not being wet, but it was worth seeing Jay and Stephanie's faces when they came home after that event, and just, I guess, enjoying the memory that they created there at the closing ceremonies. I also remember the look of surprise when I gave my 2 teenage daughters these tie-dyed Grateful Dead T-shirts. They were being sold and made by the Lithuanian basketball team. And I remember the Lithuanian Olympic Committee kind of got in trouble selling them because they were unlicensed merch, during the Olympics. And of course, everything that was going through that place had to have the Olympic seal of approval, and I'm sure they were being tacked on price-wise to generate money. But the Lithuanians got in a little trouble. But it was a good cause because they were, helping defray the cost of coming to Atlanta with all of their athletes, and, maybe, defraying the cost of all the beer they drank in the Atlanta pubs. But again, they were a neat bunch. I remember going to one of their parties, and it was quite a treat. I couldn't understand a word that they were saying, but it was a good party. So, in closing, I can't believe it's been 30 years. And, celebrations and standing on the winner's platform and hearing the national anthem of the United States of America, it only happens once if you're lucky. And I'm a very lucky person for having been there. But, you know, it's something that kind of holds fast in your mind. You know, memories seem to work that way. And now, 30 years later, a floor at Morehouse College is still there, still being used as far as I know. But much of what we did is gone. It was taken away. It had vanished 2 weeks after the game. Actually, that's not true, because the Paralympics had their events there, and then following the Atlanta Paralympics for special needs athletes, it was all taken up and moved elsewhere. But the memories still remain. And you know, that's kind of the thing about building memories and building floors, because they tend to outlive, you know, the actual fruit of your labor, but only in your mind. Atlanta, 1996. I lived it not from the stands, but standing on the floors we built, and the floors we designed, and the floors we brought to life for the greatest of all sporting events, the Summer Olympics. And that's why I call these my senior moments. You know, maybe a better phrase would be senior memories, but things that I never forget, or at least I hope not. I hope I don't. And I guess that's yet to be seen. Got one other person watching here, Patty Pearson. I'm not sure. What does that mean there? I guess it's a little high. Somebody's waving at me. Patty, I'm glad you're listening tonight. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Donna. Appreciate y'all jumping in and commenting. Y'all be sure and hit the like button if you would. And if you want to leave a comment, feel free to do so beyond what you do here on the live event. And if you have opportunity to share the video, I would appreciate it. And I don't do this for money. I don't do it to be compensated by YouTube or Facebook. I do it really in a way to leave behind what little legacy I have in this world for my kids and grandkids to, well, perhaps find out little things about their granddad that they just maybe didn't know about, or perhaps they've forgotten as well. So that being said, I'm going to run the reel that tells you what to do. I appreciate you watching tonight, and we'll see you next week on Senior Moments, Evidence of a Misspent Youth. We'll be live at 5, and I look forward to seeing you there. Take care, and have a great week. Well, hey, thanks for spending a few minutes with me on Senior Moments. If you enjoyed the ride, be sure and tap that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. I'll be back soon with more stories from a misspent youth, and maybe some of yours too.